Well, hello folks, and welcome to another episode of Retro Power Uncut. And we're here in the fabrication shop again, and it'll be quite a brief little skirt around here because there's lots of things at not particularly photogenic stages of process, and it's not all that exciting. I'm conscious that quite a few of the things we're doing are not that exciting on video, sad to say. So we'll go over them very briefly. Project Churchill, to my right here, is, as I've been saying for some time, at the very latter stages. Thus, the masking tape applied in various areas where Cal has been over it doing a little analysis of some of the areas that still need work the other day. There'll probably be another little go round again once those areas are addressed. But basically, we're doing all of the little nitpicking, fault finding, dealing with nitty gritty issues. I think I mentioned last week about the modification to the door frame, the door apertures. That's done now. We've added the new sections into the top of both of these, so we've now got an even gap for the door seal along the top of both doors, so that's all good. Stu's done some revisions around here. Tom's doing some lead work on the front. We revised that door aperture as well. We've been improving the boot lid fit because there's still a couple of areas on that still need a little bit of improvement. Tom's just working on the near side door, altering that slightly, getting the gaps improved a little bit on that. We're basically going around just tidying up gaps. There's quite a lot of hours of work, as you will have guessed by seeing the videos. There's quite a surprising number of hours of work involved in just getting gaps to be somewhere near where they need to be without having to start fettling things around with body filler, which we don't really want to do. Certainly not in terms of door gaps and edges. That's a very bad idea. So we're just trying to get everything as good as we can get it without, before we go into the body prep stage. And then once we've done that, the next stage will be strip it down, get it on the rotisserie, do the finish welding underneath, and then it's into blast and zinc metal spray. And to that end, I've been meaning to get onto a job today, which I haven't got onto, but if anybody is bored enough to want to follow it, I'll perhaps film a bit of it, but I need to strip down my zinc metal spray gun. Be a bit of an aside, if anybody's interested, we'll get a few shots of it in bits. It'll probably help me remember where all the bits go. But I know the last time I used it, the gas mixing valve was playing up, so I need to strip that down and rebuild it. So yeah, that's all work to come. But we are really on all the nitty-gritty stages of this, just trying to get everything to line up. And there's another example, darting back to here. Stu's been trying to work out the, without actually fitting the final trims, checking that the gutter trims are going to work and that the joiners are going to work and that the joiners will screw to the roof frame correctly and all this sort of stuff. He can't fit the final trims because I'm fairly sure if we fit them, we're going to damage them getting them back off. So we don't want to commit to fitting the whole trims because they're a bit of a one-shot deal. Or there's a chance that they can be a one-shot deal. So he's used some sections of old gutter trim to check that that this all sits correctly and screws on correctly for this joining piece that joins the that links the two sections together. But yeah, there's lots of detail work, fitting sections of door seals to check the door shuts are correct. Just loads and loads of bits of detail work, none of which is particularly photogenic stuff. So there's no point in really diving into great detail any of that. That's where we're at on Churchill. Scott's working behind me. I don't know if he's actually lurking in there or not. No, he's not at the moment. But we've got just in our blast room, we're using the blast room extraction as the extraction to remove any carbon dust. And so Scott is working on the carbon panel fit up on the Redux car, and on this Redux car, obviously there are two. He's working on this one at the moment, which is the visible weave carbon panel fit up, and there's quite a lot of detail work going on in that. We're not going into great detail on the Redux projects on these videos, just because it's more for Redux to focus on rather than us to necessarily go into huge amounts of detail on. So we just sort of skim over these areas, but obviously they're in the workshop, so I'll cover the basics. But yeah, basically Scott's removed the steel rear panel. This car originally had a steel rear panel. A change was decided on to go to carbon, visible weave carbon rear panel. So that's now mocked up in place at the moment, just loosely clamped in position. Scott's just working on the alignment between that and the quarter panels. That's why he's getting this panel in place, because there's a critical alignment point around here which aligns to the quarter panels, and that's got to be dealt with and got exactly right for obvious reasons. So that's what Scott's on with at the moment on that. This Redux project is kind of tied at the moment. That one's not being worked on at the moment, just because there's some little odds and ends being finished off on the E-type, which I'll move on to now, and I'll come back to what I was going to talk about there. On the E-type, more of the same really, seat mounts. There's only so many times I can say that, but seat mounts, due to Mazda's unique design of the seats, the near side seat is totally different in structure to the offside seat, and it's thrown us a couple of curveballs in terms of the seat mountings. Sam's dealt with those now. It's taken a while, he's got those dealt with, and he's just literally getting the final mountings welded in now. So hopefully end of play today, those mounts should all be welded in, should be buttoned up on the seat mountings. So we've been a bit backwards and forwards on that, because we've had various issues with space on the driver's seat, fitted perfectly. The passenger side seat, because of the way the seat rails fit, just threw us a whole pile of problems. But Sam's just finished off getting. I mean, there's an example. That's one of the that's the outer part of the seat mount that he's made up, and that's just got the weld-through primer drying on that, and that'll be plug welded in shortly. Once I finish talking on camera, he'll come back through and carry on making some noise then. So yeah, that's where we're at on that. And then, and I've said this a couple of times previously, then that's into CAD work really. More on that shortly. And at that point then Sam will be moving over onto this Redux project and continuing the metalwork on that. Talking of continuing metalwork, obviously having a number of people operating in here at any one time, certainly 4, occasionally 5, we need a number of welders. And we have and still have 3 MIG welders. However, one of our MIG welders was previously a big ESAB LAW400W machine, which is a 400 amp water-cooled machine, which is extremely good welder. You could weld at really low voltages, really low currents, and weld at really high voltages and currents with that machine, and it was brilliant. Apart from one factor, which following our workshop reorganisation really was a bit of a problem. It's enormously heavy. It's brilliant to have in a perfectly flat floored workshop where there's lots of space, and it's brilliant to have at a static welding position, and we generally used it for fixed bench type work before. However, we don't really have that facility now because we don't really need it. We don't do much MIG bench based welding other than making fixtures, and we can do them on the fixture beds normally. So the need for that machine had gone a bit really, and it weighs all up with the water tank full and the wire feeder mounted on top. It weighs about 1/3 of a ton, so it's enormously heavy to drag around the workshop. And following the revamp, we decided actually that machine's not really very well suited to what we want. So I've actually sold that machine, and we've just bought this one, which is another little single phase. I say little, it's 220 amp I think, single phase GYS MIG from Matt at Stakesy's Metalwork Machinery, doing my little plug there, but he's really good bloke to deal with. We get on really well with Matt. He's a really nice guy, and he sells GYS welders, and I like GYS. We quite like GYS welders. In terms of, I've not got a lot of experience with their TIG units, though I have used them. Not an abundance of experience, but the Pro MIG 400 that we have over there, that we also got from Matt a couple of years back, has been absolutely brilliant machine. And I thought, you know what, we need a little single phase machine, 200 amp-ish single phase machine. It's just a lot easier to drag around the workshop. So got that from Matt. Looks a lovely thing. It's not actually been used yet. It's completely unsoiled at the moment. It's not even got wire in it. Put the gas bottle on this morning. It'll get wire in probably tomorrow or something, and then we'll be running that. But really pleased, really good deal. Matt's a really good guy. So for any metalwork machinery or anything like that, speak to Matt at Stakesy's. Good chap. So that's where we're at on that. And then moving along, we're going to briefly touch on the Algros. You will notice an absence of stuff going on here. That's because Bobby has popped back to Bulgaria briefly to have some dental work done. He's having some titanium put in his gnashers, which is getting. Yeah, well, Bobby did literally message me earlier today to say that following this, we won't need the small shrinkers and stretchers because he'll be able to use his teeth. And I'm not exaggerating, that was his actual words. Now that he was supposed to be there for this week, it's actually had to run into 2 weeks because the job's grown a little bit. It's just like working on cars, working on teeth. The job's grown a little bit, and he's got to have quite a lot of stitches in his mouth, and they've got to be, all his stitches have got to be checked and everything checked for infection before he can be released from the country, really, because otherwise it's a long way to go back if something goes wrong. So he's actually off next week as well. So the Allegros, the metalwork's going to wait because Bobby knows exactly where everything's at on that. I'm not going to try and pick it up and ruin his flow on that, so we're going to let that sit and Bobby will pick that back up when he's back. However, that doesn't stop proceedings because, very, very good timing, because Luke has just appeared in the car behind me, but Luke's actually working on the CAD work for the dashboards in these, and that is very relevant to the metalwork as well because we need to put some more structure in to support the dashes in these cars. We've put the initial structure in, well, Bobby's put the initial structure in at the top to support the dash tops, but we need to put some lower structure in on the near side to support the cubby, we're going to call it, a little storage bin that's going in the dash. And in order to put that metalwork in, we basically need the dash to be designed. Because if we put it in now, if we do it by guesswork, we're going to end up with it in the wrong place. So the dash needs to be designed, and to that effect, to that end, that's exactly what Luke's working on. So I think unusually, because we've been a bit brief down here, we're going to go upstairs and have a little look at the CAD. And that also ties in quite well to something else that I'll explain when we go upstairs. So, as if by magic, I've teleported into the CAD cave. And Luke's desk is here, with Luke is downstairs in an Algr, I think, at the moment. As we can see on the screen in Fusion 360 here, is some of Luke's work on the Algr dash arrangement. It looks a little abstract at the minute because quite a lot of it was turned off. I've turned some of it on, I fiddled around with this CAD and probably made a complete mess of it, so I don't want to fiddle around with it too much more. However, you can see what he's working on, and if I sort of generally gesticulate in this area, and Jamie will probably put some clips in here that will show this better. Luke's working on the near side lower dash arrangement. The upper part is the original Algr part, which is having some tweaks, but basically going to be like that. There's some foam going in on the very top where you can see the dash vents in the car in the workshop. On this lower section, it's going to be a storage cubby, which isn't very well shown there at the minute because it's kind of exploded because I've got various bits of it turned on and off. But basically there's going to be a storage cubby in here in this lower dash section, and into that area we need to put a bit of support structure that ties down into this centre section. In the same way as on the driver's side, there is a support leg that comes up to support the sort of a dog leg, as I would call it, that comes up to support the steering column. On the passenger side, there's going to be a lower dog leg that also bolts to the support structure in the middle, which is going to be made from billet aluminium. There'll be a support structure coming up, which will be a steel tube that comes up. It'll be bolted in, and that will come along and support this cubby, and then come up and tie into the inner A-pillar structure here, but just by the side of the HVAC unit. This shadow in the background is the edge of the HVAC unit in the scan. And this is the centre tunnel of the Integra floor pan from the scan, and then this is, as you can see, the Algr windscreen surround from the scan. So that's what Luke's working on at the moment, the CAD work to do with all of this centre section, all of this dash structure, and all of that side of things. Now, George, behind camera, is working on various things to do with the V12 E-Type. Principally, he is working on the roll bar arrangement at the moment. Now, we call it a roll bar. Its principal task is actually to support the weather gear, because the car is going to have rudimentary, would probably be the best description, weather gear, so that it can be parked and at a push driven in the rain, but so that it doesn't have a big ugly folding roof, which kind of detracts from the look of an E-Type. Now, George is demonstrating now a loose idea of the roof. This is sort of a mock-up at the moment, but basically we want to be able to have an arrangement that permits the car not to fill with water whilst not detracting from it when it's used in pleasant weather, which will be the main aim of the car. And to that end, we need a support bar for that roof. And that support bar can double as an additional safety bar. Now, I'd seen a couple of comments to do with roll bars and safety and forgetting to latch it up and things like that. Its principal function is not going to be for safety. That will be an additional benefit function, but its principal function is not for safety. Its principal function is to support the weather gear. It will be built so that it will be strong enough to function in a roll, but equally we're not crash testing the car for obvious reasons, so we can't apply crash loads to it in every direction and establish exactly how it would behave in an accident. So that's not its principal function. So forgetting to put it up will be the least of the concerns under those circumstances. And the thing with an E-type is, given that your main roll protection as standard are two, I don't even know what they'd be called, hockey sticks that support the windscreen, which you could pretty much bend over with a firm push. That's going to be a significant improvement on those two hockey sticks. George's so his current work is primarily focused around that roll bar and its integration into the rear body, remembering that the rear body is also being made basically from scratch and will also be made in carbon fibre. So that's his primary work at the moment, but his next phase of work will be the interior design work that's also required on this car, because that's going to dictate further metal work. So everything ties together and all basically results in George having many things to do. But that also ties in quite well to something else we can see in the background here, which is sort of lurking, which I'm going to mention in a moment, which is that all of these processes are gradually evolving. You know, we've evolved over the years, and we still are evolving quite rapidly in our design and manufacture processes for interior components. And it's very easy to look at a volume manufacturer of cars and see the processes they've used to generate interior parts. But the majority of the processes that most volume manufacturers use to generate interior parts are really geared up for volume, for very high volume, and the tooling costs are phenomenal, hugely expensive. And historically, if you looked at low volume production cars, the interiors were probably, how should we put it, agricultural at best, generally made out of flat bits of wood covered in leather and padding, and they all had a bit of a kit car-y look to pardon me, a bit of a kit car-y look to the interior, quite simplistic. Now, we don't want to make overly complicated interiors, but at the same time it's quite nice to be able to bring a little bit of a volume OEM type of interior to a very limited one or two off type of car build, such as the type of work we do here. And to that end, the march of technology is really helping us quite a lot. And one of the areas is 3D printing. That is only one of them. And one of the things an area we're learning rapidly is the most efficient and best processes for generating interior components. And sometimes to the uninitiated, they may seem like slightly strange ways of going about things. One of the things that's sort of ringing through my head at the moment is I think it's been mentioned possibly in comments a couple of times, and it's certainly I've certainly read comments somewhere, and somebody has also told me this, that we get very carried away machining pieces of aluminium for interiors. And what you have to remember, I don't know if Carl's mentioned this before, but what you have to remember is a lot of the time machining that part from aluminium is not very much more expensive than machining it from MDF or any other soft material to make a tool to then make that part from composite. And to be honest, if you're making one or two of those parts, it actually tends to work out cheaper to just machine the final parts directly from aluminium than it does to machine a mould tool and then make them from plastic or composite in that mould tool. This is where the economy of scale sort of changes things. But one of the big areas of progress is 3D printing. Now, we've mentioned our old now 3D printer, which you'll have seen in previous episodes downstairs, which is a very, very, very heavily modified Creality CR10 S4 printer, which has been I've modified to direct drive extruder and put in a big enclosure, and we've pretty much changed every component on it other than the basic frame and structure. And it's very good at printing high volume parts relatively quickly, but it's not the best for high accuracy, very high resolution. It could be improved by fitting a smaller nozzle. We run it with a 0.6mm nozzle. However, it's still not that great, and it becomes intolerably slow if you're running with that size of nozzle. Tied into all of this interior development work in the background is the fact that all of these parts are being drawn in Fusion 360, which we use and we really like. And again, I'd have to sort of wholeheartedly say it has revolutionised our approach to CAD. It's brought accessibility to technology that we otherwise wouldn't really be able to justify on working on the volume of vehicles that we work on. And because of that, we've actually developed quite a nice working relationship with Autodesk, particularly Richard Stubley at Autodesk UK. And on our last visit to Autodesk UK, which was not very long ago, he showed us Bamboo Labs X1 Carbon 3D printer. He showed us a number of 3D printers, ranging it from enormously expensive to extremely cheap. And at the very much the cheaper end was the Bamboo Labs printer, and the point he made was that actually putting it in direct comparison with some very expensive, not that old printers, without naming names and pointing fingers, it's incredibly capable. The build volumes are a little bit limited, but it's an incredibly capable machine. And as of 2 days ago, we have accumulated, bought, this wasn't a freebie, it wasn't given to us or anything, this was our latest sort of acquisition, is this Bamboo Labs X1 Carbon printer, which is already printing some parts for our wiring, for Alex, who's doing the wiring looms for the ESCORT. That's already printing some parts for those. There's an enclosure, I think we may have showed it before, as an enclosure we printed on our printer, but it was a bit clunky looking. So we're actually printing those now. Now we can print nylon on this machine, and we can print carbon-filled nylon. We're actually reprinting those enclosures in carbon-filled nylon. The impressive thing with this machine is just so fast. Those parts, I don't know how long they took to print on our old printer, but quite a while with a much bigger nozzle. On this, they're printing in, what's it, 4 hours?
4 hours on the
yeah, so with a 0.6mm nozzle on our old printer with very, very low resolution. Took approximately 4 hours to print those parts. On this is printing those parts with a 0.4mm nozzle in 40 minutes to much higher definition. You know, really, just totally different level of definition. So just the march of technology is extremely impressive. This machine has a LiDAR set up inside it so that it analyses for a start, it does a shape test. It basically stresses all its axes initially to establish the elasticity in them and establish the reaction of all the axes before it starts to print, so that it sets up compensation factors for all that elasticity before it starts. And then when it starts to lay the first layer down, it uses a LiDAR sensor of some sort. That's sort of things I don't really know a lot about, but basically it looks at the first layer as it prints it, analyses that print, and checks that the first layer is set up correctly, so that, you know, that our old printer, you always basically have to watch the first layer like a hawk. The bed plate isn't deadly flat, the leveling's never perfect. If you're going to hit a problem, it's always on the first layer, so realistically you're a fool to walk away from that first layer. On this machine, it looks at the first layer and deals with that bit itself. The parameters as set within the machine and within the slicing software, there's just no fiddling basically. On the old machine, it'd take you a couple of days of messing about to get a new material to print acceptably. On this, we just basically put the material in, press go, and it prints. It's just a whole nother level. You know, anybody can print something in PLA. You know, print a fairly simple structure in PLA. You know, in their bedroom, relatively simply on most printers. But this machine, we've just thrown a spool of high temperature nylon filament with carbon dust reinforcement in it. And nylon's not the easiest material to print in the world, and you literally just put it in, press go, and it's printing it. Can't say enough about it. Really very happy with that. And also tied into a neat little tie in there as well is last week I'd mentioned about the work I was doing in the workshop on the plasma cutter, and the fact that I'd got the torch height control operating, but then I needed to revise our G-code generation to be able to automatically set up the torch height controller. And to that end, also bringing Autodesk into the mix, Richard Stubley also got in contact with us saying, if you need a hand, let me know. We can do that direct from Fusion. Now, I knew we could do that direct from Fusion, as I'm sure a lot of people watching our videos do. But Fusion 360 has an extensive CAM capability, and driving a 3-axis machine like a simple plasma cutter is really a walk in the park to it. But it's not something we've done before. I already use SheetCam software. I was very familiar with it. I'd never really had the impetus to change it. However, Richard's been in touch and said, look, if you want to move ahead a little bit with CAM in Fusion to that end, then I can give you a hand doing that. We'll get things in motion there. So to that end, we're going to do that. Give it a couple of weeks. We're going to get that in process so that we can incorporate the torch height control into the CAM side of things in Fusion and take one of the steps out of the loop of setting up the plasma cutter. It's not that it takes long now. It's a pretty slick operation now in terms of getting from a drawing in Fusion to a cut piece on the machine is a matter of not many minutes. But if we can reduce that even further and simplify that job even more, all the better. And also that will then mean I don't have to work out how to set up my custom tool sets in SheetCam, which I'm sure is all doable. It's all programmable, but it will just avoid me having to do that. I can just do it all automatically within Fusion, and we'll be away. Now, interestingly, the printer has just stopped.
Checking its first layer.
It's doing its first layer check now. That's interesting. Yeah. So this is the machine's now actually scanning that first layer and deciding whether there's any problems there. I don't quite know what it decides and what it does at that point, but it's checking it anyway.
It will stop if it's not happy.
Yeah.
Because there was one earlier where we were playing with some settings and it stopped itself when it was
right.
going to go wrong. So
cool.
It's pretty good.
Yeah. So it's we're really very excited about this. And the other tie, and I'm not going to say too much because I'll jinx the whole idea. However, there is another little string to the bow of the CAM side of Fusion, which is that hopefully, with a bit of luck and a following wind, and maybe we may be trying to get ourselves set up with a CNC router, which will open up some further possibilities. And obviously, at that point, we really will want to integrate the CAM side of Fusion into our design work so that we can do some of the parts that are not being direct machined in aluminium, where we do need to make mold tools or we do need to machine foam and that type of work. We can then bring that in-house and do that here on a rapid turnaround. We're not being tied by lead times and suppliers. We can just bring that in-house, but that's some way off yet. I'm not going to say too much there because I'll be getting well ahead of myself. But I think I've probably rambled on enough at that, and I ought to hand over to Cal before I start encroaching too much into the assembly workshop and taking over too much of his half of the video. So at that point, I shall hand over to Cal, and I'll see you in a week's time. Cool. Right, thank you, Nat. I'm going to start in the office because a couple of things come in. For the ESCORTs, there's duplicates of these, but I think I mentioned previously we were waiting for these CAN bus controllers that Peterson EV have been building for us, and also the CAN bus steering controllers. From the same company. So CAN bus controller for the instruments essentially is taking the digital feed from the engine ECU, and then this in turn powers the analog instruments rather than having to have separate sensors for the instruments, which is just a much nicer way of doing it. And then the EPAS controller. So one of the things that the engine ECU will be receiving is a speed signal from the speed sensor in the gearbox, and as well as powering the speedo via the CAN bus controller I've just mentioned, it'll also be varying the assistance rate on the electric power steering, and that is basically what this does. So this will receive that CAN bus signal from the Motec ECU, which will tell it how fast the car's going, and then we can use that controller to vary the amount of assistance on the steering. Essentially, so you'll have a lot of assistance when you're going very slow and manoeuvring, and that ramps down to no assistance over a certain speed. And another thing that's turned up in the office, probably only an episode or two after I showed you the Morris one, is the handbook that I've done for the Land Cruiser. So with the imminent handover of that car, this is the sort of owner's handbook. It gives you a sort of quick start guide, if you like, to that car. If you follow me, I'll show you what else we've been up to. It's a bit dark down here. Maybe it always is, it just seems odd. Okay, so essentially a flurry of activity on the two ESCORTs. So Project Kuma we showed was in here last week, and because we've got a lot of things in place, Anthony had already built up the subframes, etc. we were in a position to get that rolling pretty quickly. So as you can see, that is now subframes in, wheels on. Very excited to see it on the deck side by side with its sister build. And we're at that position now where this one will catch that one very quickly because we've already done a lot of the sort of sub-assembly work. A lot of the parts are literally ready to go, and at the same state as the ones on that. So although this car's slightly further ahead, we put the exhaust system on that one now because it's got an engine in, and that's probably the clincher in terms of the difference between them at the minute, is we haven't had the engine through from Sherwood for this car yet. We have for that one. So that one we're able to get exhaust, and now we're moving on to plumbing. So we're doing both cars at the same time, just for efficiency really, because we get all the hoses crimped at a local company, Nuneaton Hose and Fittings. An offshoot of that company is Racing Lines, and they do a lot of the hose supply. So we use Racing Lines Superlight hose for all of the fuel plumbing, the oil plumbing. We use Racing Lines Teflon lined stainless steel braided hose with crimped on fittings for all the brake lines. So what Anthony's doing at the minute is essentially mocking up, cutting, cleaning, mocking up all of the fuel and oil hoses and the brake lines, so we can take them all in one massive batch over to Nuneaton Hose. They'll then crimp and pressure test everything, and then we'll get them back, and then they'll be able to go on. The fuel pumps and filters are now fitted, so as soon as we've got those fuel lines back, the whole fuel pumping system can go in. Obviously this car is limited to the fact it doesn't have an engine. That one we can literally complete the fuel system on it. Fuel tank's already in on that car. This one still needs a fuel tank fitting. So yeah, we're going through that phase where we're going to be catching this build up with that one essentially. Something I can't remember whether I mentioned last week or not was the dash panel on that. We were doing the door cards, which I showed, where we were just aligning for where the stitch lines are going to go. And then Dean dropped off the seats and collected the door cards, and he also collected the dash panel. So we were just trial fitting the Resto Mod Air vents into the dash, making sure they had enough clearance for the wraparound of the leather on the dash top. And then that dash panel's gone to Dean with the other parts, so he's going to be leathering those bits as we speak. And then other avenues of progress, James is building the pedal boxes up at the moment. So we received the billet pedal arms we designed and had machined back from anodizing last week, and the pedal pads in fact as well. So he's just in the process of building those up now. They'll both be ready to go into the cars probably by the end of today. Steering columns are ready to go into both cars, so they're going to be going in shortly. And then with the arrival of things like the e-pass controller and the instrument controller, those are the things that were holding up Alex from being able to complete the main wiring harness. So he can get on with checking the lengths of the wires to those components, terminating everything there. And we should be in a position also next week to get the wiring harness into the main wiring harness into the Project 1, and then we can start duplicating that harness for Kuma. So yes, it's just a sort of, it's that really exciting, pleasing part of a build where there's just lots to do, lots of components to go in. We've been building up the billet tanks as well that go in the engine bay. So one of those is the brake and clutch fluid. The other one is the fill to the screen wash. The actual screen wash tank itself is in the footwell. In fact, I'm not sure if I mentioned last week that they'd been painted. So there are some fabricated tanks that kind of look like co-driver footrests, but they're actually a large volume screen wash tank, and you fill it via the billet tank on the bulkhead, but there's a large pipe that drops down and actually fills a huge tank in the footwell. So there's a few benefits. Obviously a massive capacity, but it's also down low, so the weight's kept down low in there, and it forms the footrest as well. So Mark's painted those. They're body colour, so that one's this sort of grey colour, grey blue, and this one's the cream colour. And then over those, to stop your feet scuffing them, we'll do some sort of skateboard grip tape covering, as it'll just have the holes punched out around where we've done the punch dimpled pressings on them. So they're about ready to go in as well. So yeah, we're kind of at that point where we're just pressing ahead. Guys finished assembling the new revised wiper assemblies last week, so they're ready to go in. And there's another big batch of parts being machined. So I think I said we were kind of in a position to pull the trigger on a lot of things last week, and now a lot of that stuff is being done. I'm getting the sort of feed of information through from our machinists, Andy Concept 303 and Jonathan at PBE CNC. So Andy's now done the bezels around the gear shifter. I think he's done the bezels around the little volume control on the center console. I can't remember if he's done the phone tray at the front, but he must be doing that any day now. which kind of completes all the machine bits for the centre console. And then there's another batch of bits being done by Jonathan, which I actually, off the top of my head, can't remember what parts they are now, but I'll get some photos from him and shove them over the top of here, and it'll hopefully be self-explanatory. So yeah, that's where we're at with the Escorts. Land Cruiser, a couple of things. I mentioned we were doing some magnetic retainers for the seatbelt buckles, which James has now done. So essentially just a powerful magnet mounted on the near the top of the B post. So when you unplug your seatbelt buckle, you can stick it onto that, so it's easy to grab it again and plug it in, because they're non-inertia reel seatbelts and there isn't any room to put inertia reels in the car. So that's that. And then as I was writing the handbook for the car, it dawned on me when I was sort of going over the various fluid fills in the engine bay that the coolant expansion tank and the screen wash tank are exactly the same as each other, and they didn't have any labelling on the lids. So that suddenly made me think I'd probably better sort that. So we've sent those lids off to Bruce Holder, Octane Legends Bruce Holder. The artwork is behind me, available in our shop as well, and Bruce will do commissions. That was an unintentional little link in there, but Octane Legends Bruce Holder, he's done the laser engraving for those caps, which I think will be back with me today. So that's probably one of the few finishing touches on that. And then when I test drove it sometime last week, although generally I'm extremely happy, there was just this little occasional knocking that was annoying me. It wasn't over big bumps. The times it was doing it was when you were slightly loaded up into a corner and you hit some jittery bumps, and there was quite a pronounced knock, like body to chassis or something along those lines, it sounded like, or a mechanical component on the chassis. And we've had a look over it a few times and I couldn't see anything mechanical anywhere near any part of the chassis. And we sort of identified a couple of potential things, but nothing very convincing. And then I was just rocking the front of the car to see if it was some suspension related thing. And I realised that the one hinge that we haven't remade from scratch, because all the door hinges, bonnet hinges, back door hinges, we've machined all those from scratch, put bronze bushes and shoulder bolts in, so there's absolutely zero play in any of those. But there's a hinge at the bottom of the front panel, the sort of grille and headlight panel. So I guess the intention originally is that you could unbolt parts and fold that front panel forward. Now, I can't imagine that ever needing to be done on this. A, you'd have to take the spotlight bar off to do it, and B, if you just have it unboltable, the whole panel can just be lifted out anyway. And what I discovered was, while rocking the front, that hinge has had a load of play in it, and of course, when the car's going over bumps, because that hinge is effectively another body mount, the bodywork's shaking around because it's got some rubbers between that and the chassis, and that hinge was basically rattling back and forth and creating a knock, or at least I'm 90% sure now that's what it was. So we decided to just ditch the hinge rather than machining a fancy hinge. Given that it's never going to be hinged, we've just made a solid mount for there. It's got a rubber pad under it, as all the other body mounts have, but we've just removed the hingeability of it. That's now been made, painted, fitted, so fingers crossed that'll solve that problem. So as soon as those caps come back, I'm going to stick them on, take it out for another drive. Fingers crossed that knock will be gone, and I think we're good to hand that over at that point. So that is exciting times on that one. Other thing I might briefly mention actually is it's lurking over here. The elephant in the room is this, which is one of my cars. This is basically our family car, if you like, and it's a car that in the UK probably not a lot of people will recognise. It's what was sold in the UK as a Mitsubishi Airtrek Turbo R, which in terms of the engine and driveline shares a lot of its parts with a Mitsubishi Lancer Evo, probably Evo 7 generation. The engine spec's slightly different and it's an automatic, but it's quite a cool car. I had a Forester before, which I did really like. Trying to tick that box of a car that's reasonably sporty to drive, but also reasonably spacious inside. And I tend to lean towards Japanese stuff, particularly of the late 90s, early 2000s, because generally, I should touch some wood, but generally they're pretty reliable. So yeah, that was a choice we made to see what one of these would be like as an alternative to a Forester, and I have to say it's a pretty damn good car. It's a little bit more basic inside. The ride is, I would say, a little bit too firm. It's quite surprising because
it's fine. When it's loaded up with a load of stuff and 4 people, it feels about right. But when you're just on your own in it, it's almost overly harsh, the ride on it, which is surprising considering it's all completely standard. But anyway, it's in here because there was a little bit of an oil leak on the cam cover gasket. So I'm just tackling that, and it needed some discs and pads on the front, which I've already done. And inevitably, with the cam cover gasket, the situation arose, which happens whenever I work on one of my own cars, is that I got halfway into the job and realised the replacement gasket I got wasn't the right one. So at the moment I'm waiting for the correct cam cover gasket to arrive so I can finish that, get that back together, and get that back on the road. There's one final thing, a question. So this was from Ernie D3123. I think it was a question from his daughter, or perhaps this is the person, Ivy, 10 years old. She was asking about the dog, Buzz. So this is George's new dog and what breed it was, and it's a Jack Russell. So Buzz is definitely the subject of lots of oohs and ahs and cuteness at the minute around the workshop, particularly at lunchtime. So on that note, temperatures are dropping, so beanies and hoodies in the shop, good choice. I said last week, coffee's back in stock. Christmas is coming. I think probably over the coming weeks we'll put like a Christmas bundle in the shop, or a couple, so you can kind of buy a whole bundle of merch together with a bit of a discount on it with the run up to Christmas. And I will see you next week. Bye bye.